The sun rose over New Ashenvale, casting a warm golden light on the fields of a dense grain that stretched to the horizon. It was a quiet morning, punctuated by the rhythmic hum of the irrigation pumps and the faint clinking of tools in the settlement square. Marcus Kane walked the perimeter, his rifle slung across his back. The air smelled of damp earth, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a fleeting smile. "Morning, Marcus," called Dr. Elias Moreno from the Colonial Clinic's open window. "Morning, Doc." Marcus tipped his head in acknowledgement, continuing his patrol. For the first time in years, he felt he could breathe here. After a life spent in the chaos of war zones, New Ashenvale was a haven, a place to start over. His communicator buzzed. A voice crackled through, tense and clipped. "Marcus, we've got something on the scopes. Unidentified ship entering orbit." Marcus stiffened. His eyes darted to the clear blue sky. But nothing was visible yet. "How big?" "Big," came the reply. His heart sank. "Sound the alarm." The colony erupted into controlled chaos. Workers abandoned their tasks and rushed to the armory, while parents corralled their children towards the underground shelter beneath the town hall. Marcus sprinted to the communications hub, his boots kicking up plumes of dust. "What do we know?" he barked, bursting into the small room where the colony's scanner operator, Lenka Miles, was hunched over flickering a monitor. "Damn thing's got to be a pirate ship," Lenka replied, her voice trembling. She adjusted the controls, the image of a massive vessel solidifying on the screen. It was a hulking, angular monstrosity, bristling with weapons and marked with jagged red insignias. "It's too close for comfort." "Get everyone underground," Marcus ordered, "and keep the transmitters ready. If they send down raiders, we'll need to signal for help." "Help? From who?" Lenka asked. "We're months away from the nearest patrol." Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the transmitter and bolted outside, his mind already racing. The first dropship hit minutes later, kicking up plumes of dirt as they descended into the fields. Marcus crouched behind a barricade near the main gate, his rifle steady in hands. Through the scope, he saw the pirates disembarking, hulking, brutish figures, their armor mismatched and scavenged, their weapons menacing. They came in waves, firing wildly at the settlement's outer defenses. Marcus barked orders to the colonists positioned behind the makeshift barricades. "Hold your fire until they're close. Conserve your ammo." The first wave reached the barricades, and Marcus's voice rang out. "Now!" The air filled with the sharp crack of gunfire. The colonists were mostly farmers and engineers, far from trained soldiers, but desperation made them fierce. The pirates faltered as more bullets tore through their ranks, but they pressed forward, knowing they outnumbered their defenders. Marcus's rifle spat fire, each shot precise. He took down 3 attackers in rapid succession, but his sharp eyes caught a second dropship landing to the east, near the power station. "Damn it," he muttered, switching to the communicator. "They're splitting up! We need a team at the power station, now!" "I'll go," Lenka's voice came through. "No," Marcus snapped. "Stay at the comms hub and keep the transmitter online. I'll handle it." The power station was already under attack when Marcus arrived. 2 pirates were planting explosives near the main generator. He dropped one with a clean headshot and rushed to the other, tackling him to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, the pirate snarling as he swung a blade. Marcus twisted, using the pirate's momentum to slam him into the station's wall. The pirate slumped, unconscious. Marcus stood, breathing heavily, when he heard a faint scuffle behind him. He spun, weapon raised, to an alien figure emerging from the shadows. "Don't shoot!" the alien hissed, raising her hands. She was Sinrath, with pale blue skin and faint glowing glyphs tracing her arms. She wore tattered pirate gear, but had no visible weapon. "I'm not with them anymore!" Marcus's finger hovered over the trigger. "Prove it." She stepped closer, her hands still raised. "I sabotaged their dropship. Look at the wreckage outside. They crashed because of me." Marcus hesitated. His eyes narrowed. He had seen the wreckage on his way here. It didn't seem like they meant to split their forces. He pressed her for answers, training the weapon more precisely on her forehead. "Why?" "They're monsters. She said, and her voice trembled. "I was press-ganged." Marcus Marcus brought the Cyranth, who introduced herself as Kyra Thalos, back to the main square as the pirates' first wave retreated to the first dropship, the second all but abandoned. Though he kept her restrained, the colonists' reactions were predictably hostile.
"Why is she here?"
one man shouted.
"She's one of them."
"She says she wants to help," Marcus replied, his tone brooking no argument. "And right now, we need all the help we can get." Kyra remained quiet under their glares, but eventually spoke. "The pirates won't stop with a raid. They'll take your resources, your people." Her gaze turned downwards and her tone turned dark. "Then they'll burn the rest." "Why should we trust you?" Lenka remanded, arms crossed. "Because I know how to stop them," Kyra pleaded. "Their leader, Zarak Dawn, is obsessed with this colony. He'll keep sending waves until you're defenseless. But this fleet has a weakness. Their dropships rely on a central control node aboard his flagship that he manages directly because he's too paranoid to trust anyone else with it. No one but me. Disable that and you cut them off." Marcus studied her. "Forgetting the question of why he trusts you, how?" She hesitated, then said, "I'll need access to your comms array. I can overload their signal and force their ships to land away from the colony." "Or she could call for reinforcements," Lenka muttered. Marcus made his decision. "As if we aren't outnumbered already. We don't have a choice. Let her work." Under Marcus's watchful eye, Kyra worked quickly, though he wasn't sure how she was so familiar with human tech. "I'm rerouting their signal," she explained. "Give me 5 minutes." The pirate's second wave hit just as she finished, and this time they showed him force. Heavy power armoured infantry led the charge. Marcus and the colonists held their ground, their makeshift defences barely holding under the assault. Explosions rocked the settlement, sending dirt and debris flying. Through the chaos, Marcus spotted a pirate heavy gunner aiming a plasma cannon at the main gate. "Tessa!" he shouted, waving the young colonist over. "Take the left flank and distract him. I'll handle the rest." Tessa hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes, but she nodded and darted into position. Her fire drew the gunner's attention, giving Marcus the opening he needed. He lunged forwards through the crossfire, slamming a grenade into the weapon's barrel before rolling away and retreating back into the barricade. The explosion was deafening, but the gate could hold against a distant shockwave. By nightfall, the battle was over. The pirates had retreated. Their dropships grounded far from the colony thanks to Kyra's interference, which meant they had a long way to run even while wounded. The settlement was battered, but intact. In the aftermath, Marcus gathered the colonists in the square. "We held them off for today," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "But they'll be back. We need to rebuild, fortify, and prepare for the next attack." "What about her?" someone asked, pointing at Kyra. Marcus looked at her, then back at the crowd. "She stays. For now." Kyra met his gaze, but her expression was unreadable. Night fell over New Ashenvale, but the darkness brought no peace. The sky shimmered with ominous light as Zarak Dawn's flagship hovered in orbit, its massive silhouette blocking the stars. The low rumble of engines echoed through the air as smaller ships fitted between the clouds, scouting for weaknesses. Marcus Kane stood atop the colony's main watchtower, his rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the horizon through infrared goggles. The once tranquil settlement was now a fortress of makeshift barricades, hastily fortified walls, and armed colonists. Yet, for all their effort, Marcus knew they were running on borrowed time. "We can't take another hit like that," Elias Moreno said, climbing the ladder to join him. "We've got 15 injured, 3 critical, supplies are running low, and people are scared." Marcus lowered his goggles. "They should be scared." His voice was even, but the weight in it was palpable. Elias hesitated. "What's the plan, Marcus? How do we survive this?" Before Marcus could answer, his communicator buzzed. "Kane," came Lenka Miles' voice, tight with urgency. "We've got incoming. Multiple signatures. Dropships and drones. Looks like another wave." Marcus's jaw tightened. A night raid. "Sound the alarm." The colony sprang to life as the alarm blared. Colonists grabbed their weapons and rushed to their assigned positions. Marcus moved quickly through the chaos, barking orders to keep the defense organized. He found Kyra Thalos in the comms hub, her slender hands darting over the console. "I've got access to the drone formations," she said, not looking up. "They're targeting your power grid and comm arrays. Typical pirate strategy, cripple the infrastructure first." Marcus crossed his arms. "What's the counterplay?" Kyra hesitated, glancing at him. "Same as the dropships. The drones are fast, but they're running in a tight coordination through a central node. If I can crack into that, I might be able to crash them all at once." Marcus studied her, weighing her words. "How long?" 15 minutes, she replied. "You have 5, he said, heading for the door. "Do what you can. I'll buy you some time." The first wave of drones descended like a swarm of locusts, their sleek bodies gliding under the moonlight. They buzzed through the air, firing energy pulses that tore through the colony's defenses. Marcus and a team of colonists opened fire from behind sandbag barricades, their bullets lighting up the sky. The drones moved too quickly for easy shots, but every so often, one of them spiraled out of the sky in a shower of sparks. "Tessa!" Marcus called, spotting the young colonist crouched behind a stack of crates. "Cover the west flank!" Tessa Grail nodded, her face pale, but more determined than it were in the last battle. She sprinted to her position, her rifle spitting out rounds at the encroaching swarm. As the battle raged, Marcus's communicator crackled. "I'm almost there!" Kyra's voice cut out through the noise. "Just keep them off me!" Marcus ducked as a drone zipped overhead, its energy pulse scorching the dirt beside him. He took aim and fired, hitting its propulsion unit. The drone exploded in midair, raining debris around him. "Almost isn't good enough," he muttered, reloading. Inside the comms hub, Kyra worked furiously, her glowing glyphs pulsing with stress. Her fingers danced across the console as she manipulated the pirate network, searching for the control node. Come on, she muttered, her jaw tight. Finally, she found it, a hidden frequency buried within the drone's network. With a triumphant cry, she hit the command to overload it. Outside, the drones froze mid-flight, their lights flickering before they plummeted to the ground like stones. Kyra slumped back in her chair, exhaling shakily. She tapped her communicator. "The swarm's down. I hope they decide to retreat." The next wave hit minutes later, dropships landing on the outskirts of the colony, much closer than before, and began disgorging squads of heavily armed pirates. Zarax Dawn's forces moved with brutal efficiency, advancing through the fields towards the settlement's walls. Marcus coordinated the defense, positioning sharpshooters on the rooftops while ground teams reinforced the barricades. "They're targeting the south wall!" Lenka shouted from her perch in the watchtower. Marcus nodded. "Tessa, Elias, you're with me. Kyra, keep an eye on the comms. Let us know if they're planning another strike." The trio raced to the south wall, where the pirates were hammering the defenses with multiple plasma cannons this time. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. "Hold the line!" Marcus bellowed, his rifle kicking against his shoulder as he fired at the advancing pirates. Tessa crouched beside him, her shots growing more accurate with each passing moment. "They just keep coming!" she shouted, panic creeping into her voice. "They'll break before we do," Marcus replied grimly. The tide turned when Kyra's voice crackled through Marcus's communicator. "I've got something. Zarak's flagship is vulnerable. He's decided to start using the unstable fuel cells he's been holding on to. A well-placed strike could disable it." Marcus's heart raced. "You're sure?" "Positive," Kyra replied. "But we need to get close, inside their shields. I don't suppose you have a ship?" Marcus glanced at the raging battle around him. The colony couldn't hold much longer. "No. So we take the fight to them," he said. The plan was desperate, but it was all they had. Marcus, Kyra, and Tessa fought through the pirate lines and captured a dropship, prepared to infiltrate Zarak's flagship. Lenka would stay behind to coordinate the colony's defenses, while Elias kept the wounded safe. As the dropship lifted off, Marcus addressed the team. "This is a one-way trip. We take out the flagship, or we don't come back." Kyra nodded, her expression resolute. "I can guide us to the power core. Once we're there, I'll need time to overload the fuel cells." "Just tell me where to shoot," Tessa said, gripping her rifle tightly. Marcus gave a faint smile. "Stay close, and don't miss." The flagship loomed ahead, its angular hull bristling with weapons that have remained mysteriously silent during all of the pirates' assaults. Marcus chalked it all up to the ship itself being as makeshift and poorly maintained as the pirates' infantry equipment. The dropship slipped through the shields, its stolen transponder codes masking their approach. They landed in a dark, industrial hangar, the air heavy with the smell of oil and ozone. Marcus led the way, his rifle sweeping the area. Kyra pointed to a set of corridors. "The power core's this way!" They moved quickly, encountering scattered resistance. Marcus's combat experience shone as he took down pirates with precise, effective shots. Tessa followed his lead, her confidence growing with each skirmish. Finally, they reached the core room, a massive chamber filled with glowing, humming machinery. Kyra set to work, her hands deftly manipulating the controls. "Hurry!" Marcus urged, keeping watch. "I'm going as fast as I can!" Kyra replied, her voice strained. The door behind them burst open, and a squad of pirates stormed in. Marcus and Tessa opened fire, and the room erupted into chaos. "Almost there!" Kyra shouted over the noise. The final moments were a blur. Kyra activated the overload sequence and the power cores began to pulse dangerously. Marcus grabbed her arm and shouted, "Time to go!" They ran. The ship shook violently as the core destabilized. Explosions rocked the corridors, sending debris raining down around them. They barely made it back to the dropship before the flagship's reactors detonated. The blast tore through the small fleet of surviving drones, fighters, and drone ships, and a handful of smaller vessels that were hovering around the flagship turned fireball, leaving the colony's defenders cheering as the sky lit up with fire. The air inside New Ashen Vale's makeshift combat center was thick with tension. The remnants of Zarak Dawn's pirate fleet loomed in orbit, battered but still operational. Despite the destruction of their flagship, the remaining pirate vessels circled like vultures, their predatory patience evident. Worse still, Kyra Thales had just delivered news that sent a chill through Marcus Kane's veins. "Their reinforcements will be here in less than 24 hours, Kyra said, her glyph-like markings faintly glowing as she studied the stolen pirate schematics projected on the main console. "And they're bringing a weapon, an orbital bombardment system." The room fell silent. Around the table, the colony's leaders exchanged grim looks. Tessa Grail, still bandaged from the last skirmish, leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus replied, his voice heavy, "if they fire that weapon, the colony will be nothing but a crater. The only question is why? Why go through all of this effort for a colony? What reason would pirates have? They don't gain anything from this." The air fell silent as no one could think of an answer. They were faced with a foe that, for reasons unknown, sought to obliterate them seemingly unprovoked. Lenka Miles, who had been monitoring the communications array, spoke up. "We could try to evacuate. Get everyone into the old colonization shuttles and head for the nearest settlement." "And leave everything we've built here to burn?" Marcus shot back. He shook his head. "No. We stand and fight." Kyra hesitated before speaking. "There's one more chance. You'll never guess it. The orbital bombardment system also has a center control module, for pretty much the same reasons as everything else. If we take out that module, the weapon becomes useless." Marcus studied the schematics, his heart racing. "How do we get there?" "We use the dropship," Kyra said. "It's disguised with their transporter codes. If we're careful, we can slip through their defenses." "That's a suicide mission," Elias Moreno said, his voice tight. Marcus met his gaze. "It's our only shot." Preparations began immediately. The colony was a hive of activity as the settlers worked to reinforce defenses, stockpile supplies, and prepare for the worst. Marcus led a small team, Kyra, Tessa, and Lenka. Aboard the captured pirate dropship, their mission clear. Infiltrate the remaining command ship, disable the control module, and return alive. The dropship's engines hummed softly as it lifted off. Marcus stood in the cockpit, staring out at the dark expanse of space. Kyra was at the controls, her hands steady despite the tension in her jaw. "Do you trust her?" Lenka whispered, standing beside him. "She's gotten us this far," Marcus replied. "That's enough for me." Lenka didn't look convinced, but she said nothing more. The command ship loomed ahead, its angular silhouette bristling with weapons, fewer than the flagship did, but still enough to bring to question why they haven't used them yet. Kyra guided the dropship carefully, her fingers flying over the controls as she transmitted the stolen transponder codes. "Hold steady," she murmured, her glowing glyphs pulsing faintly. The ship's automated defenses scanned them, and for a tense moment, Marcus thought the ruse had failed. Then, the console beeped, and the defenses powered down. "We're in," Kyra said, exhaling in relief. The dropship landed in a dark, cavernous hangar. Marcus led the team out, weapons at the ready. The air was thick with the acrid smell of oil and ozone, and the distant clanging of machinery echoed through the space. "Stay close," Marcus said, his voice low. They moved quickly, navigating the labyrinth corridors of the ship. Kyra guided them with a handheld device, her eyes flickering between the schematics and the hallways. "The control module is 3 levels ahead," she whispered. They encountered their first patrol near an access hatch. Marcus gestured for silence and raised his rifle. The pirates were distracted, their attention focused on a malfunctioning console. Marcus took them down with precise, silent shots, their bodies crumbling to the floor. Tessa stared at him, wide-eyed, as if it were the first time she'd ever seen him use a gun. "How'd you do that?" "Years of practice," Marcus replied grimly. They reached the control module without further incident, but the door was heavily reinforced and its locking mechanism glowed faintly. "This will take time," Kyra said, kneeling by the console and pulling out a small toolkit. "Keep watch." Marcus and Tessa took up defensive positions, their weapons trained on the corridor. Lenka paced nervously, her fingers twitching. "How much time?" Marcus asked. 5 minutes, Kyla replied. "Make it 3, he said. Kyra shot him a look but said nothing. What was it with humans and trying to make up fake time frames? 5 minutes is 5 minutes. Did he think she was lying to him? But now was not the time to ponder the strange inclinations of her would-be rescuers. Her focus returned to the console. The first wave of resistance came 3 minutes later. 3 pirates, armed and alert. Marcus took down the first 2 with clean shots, but the third managed to sound an alarm before Tessa finished him off. "Time's up," Marcus said.
I'm almost there!
Kyra snapped, her glyphs pulsing brighter as she worked faster. The sounds of heavy boots echoed down the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. "They're coming," Lenka said, her voice trembling.
Hold the line!
Marcus shouted. The corridor erupted into chaos as more pirates appeared with weapons ablaze. Marcus and Tessa fired back, the sharp cracks of their rifles echoing off the walls. Lenka crouched behind a crate, her hands shaking as she clutched her sidearm. Kyra worked furiously, her hands a blur.
Just a little longer!
The door finally hissed open, and Kyra scrambled inside, pulling out a small device. She plugged it into the control module and began typing commands.
"The system is locked,"
she said, her voice tight.
"I need to overload it manually."
"How long?" Marcus asked, firing another shot.
2 minutes.
"Do it." The pirates pressed harder, their numbers rapidly becoming overwhelming. Tessa cried out as a shot grazed her arm, but she kept firing, her face masked by determination.
"We can't hold them!"
Lenka shouted.
"Fall back into the room!"
Marcus ordered. They retreated, barricading the door as the pirates poured blasts of energy weapons into it. The control module sparked and flickered as Kyra finally bypassed its systems.
"Almost there,"
she muttered. The door buckled as the pirates outside realized it would be faster to use a tool rather than a gun, and began cutting through with a welder.
"Hurry!"
Marcus said.
"Yeah, fine!"
Kyra exclaimed. Yanking the device free, the control module exploded in a shower of sparks, and the ship shuddered violently. Marcus grabbed her arm.
"Time to go!"
They ran, the corridors shaking as the ship's systems overloaded, pirates shouting behind them, their voices drowned out by the sounds of explosions and alarms. The dropship was just ahead when a hulking figure stepped into their path, an alien warrior clad in heavy armor, his plasma axe glowing ominously. The alien roared, swinging the axe with brutal force. Marcus dodged, firing his rifle point blank. The shots ricocheted off the armor, and the alien lunged again. Tessa raised her rifle, aiming for a gap in the armor. Her shot hit true, and the alien staggered, his axe falling to the floor. Marcus finished him with a shot to the head. "That's how you do it," he said, pulling Tessa to her feet. She grinned despite herself. "Thanks." They boarded their stolen ship and lifted off, the hangar collapsing behind them. Kyra guided the ship through the chaos, weaving between explosions as the command ship disintegrated. They ended up doing a bit more than just disabling a weapon. Back on the ground, the colonists cheered as the pirate fleet finally began to retreat in full, their trump card neutralized. But then, a distant ship appeared on the horizon, larger, darker, and more menacing than anything they'd seen before. "What now?" Marcus complained, his hand tightening on his rifle. The horizon glowed red as the first rays of dawn broke over New Ashenvale, but there was no solace in that sunrise. A massive pirate dreadnought loomed in the sky, casting an ominous shadow over the battered colony. Marcus Kane stood once again on the watchtower, his grey eyes fixed on the monstrous vessel. It was larger than anything they had faced, a fortress in space, practically made of guns. Behind him, Kyra Thalos approached, her faintly glowing glyphs dim in the early light. "Their reinforcements are here," she said. Her voice carried a weight that Marcus hadn't heard before. "I see that," Marcus replied, his tone dull. "How long do we have?" "Not long. Their dreadnought will deploy its ground forces within the hour. If they commit fully, the colony won't stand a chance." Marcus turned to her, her expression unreadable. "What are our options? Another control node you can blow up?" But Kyra hesitated rather than confirm. "We fight." The command center was a flurry of activity. Colonists moved between stations, patching together plans and fortifications. Tessa Grail stood at a table covered in schematics, arguing with Lincoln Miles over the placement of defensive turrets. Dr. Elias Moreno treated the wounded in a corner, his hands steady despite the chaos. Marcus entered, his voice cutting through the noise. "Listen up! The pirates aren't here to negotiate. They'll hit us with everything they've got, and when they do, we need to be ready." Lenka frowned. "Ready for what? We barely held them off last time. That thing," she gestured to the dreadnought on the monitor, "is going to flatten us." "Not if we take it out first," Marcus said. The room fell silent. "You're serious? Again? There's no way they aren't going to be prepared for another boarding after losing twice to it!" Tessa pointed out the exasperated. Marcus nodded. "Kyra and I have a plan. It's risky, but it's the only shot we've got." Kyra stepped forward. "The dreadnought's defenses are almost impenetrable, but they're vulnerable to one thing, an electromagnetic pulse. Normally, the shields would protect from that, but if we can get close enough to deploy an EMP, we can disable their systems and leave them exposed." "How do we deliver the EMP?" Elias asked. Marcus folded his arms. "Manually." The plan was simple, but dangerous. Kyra had designed a makeshift EMP device using tech salvaged from the battlefield. It was small, but powerful, capable of shutting down the dreadnought's systems long enough for the colony to strike. The problem was deployment. The device would have to be activated inside the dreadnought's central reactor chamber, a place crawling with heavily armed pirates. "I'll do it," Marcus said when the room erupted into protest. "No way," Tessa said. "You'll never make it out alive." "Probably not," Marcus admitted. "But if I don't, none of us will." Kyra looked at him, her expression hard to read. "I'm going with you." Marcus shook his head. "No, you've done enough." "You'll need me to bypass the reactor security systems," Kyra argued. "And besides, I owe you this. I'd rather die taking down Zarak than die on his leash." For a moment, Marcus considered protesting, but he saw the determination in her eyes and relented. The captured pirate dropship lifted off under the cover of darkness. Marcus and Kyra sat in the cockpit, the EMP device secured in the cargo hold. "This feels familiar," Kyra said with a faint smile. "Let's hope it's the last," Marcus replied. As they approached the dreadnought, Kyra transmitted newly stolen transponder codes she happened to pick up on their way out of the previous explosion. Instead of powering down, however, they received a hail directly from Zarak on the bridge of the dreadnought. "Who is this? I was told the Morning Glory died with all hands." His voice was rough and torn, partially mechanical from what appeared to be some kind of cybernetic implant in his throat. Kyra spoke now, while Marcus stayed hidden. She spoke with some determination, but it was clear this wasn't exactly an easy conversation for her. "It's Kyra, sir." "Lord," he interrupted with a growl. "Lord Zarak," she corrected. "I managed to survive the initial assault and salvage a fallen dropship. Permission to use Hangar Bay 2, Lord?" He grinned, in the most disgusting way possible, before his feed cut out. The ship's defenses powered down, allowing them to slip through. They landed in a small maintenance bay. Despite its size, this dreadnought appears to be operated via mostly autonomous systems and a skeleton crew. That, Or most of the crew was simply elsewhere. Marcus grabbed his rifle, and Kyra slung a toolkit over her shoulder. "Ready?" Marcus asked. Kyra nodded.
Let's do this.
The interior of the dreadnought was a labyrinth of corridors and industrial machinery. Marcus and Kyra moved quickly, avoiding what few patrols there were and security cameras. Kyra consulted her handheld scanner.
The reactor chamber is 3 levels down.
"Lead the way," Marcus said. They reached a maintenance shaft and began their descent. The air grew hotter as they approached the reactor, and the hum of machinery grew louder. At the bottom of the shaft, they encountered their first resistance, a squad of pirates guarding the reactor's entrance. Marcus signaled for silence, raising his rifle. He took down 2 guards with precise shots, while Kyra disabled the third with a shock device. "Nice work," Marcus said as they moved past their bodies.
Don't get used to it,
Kyra replied. The reactor chamber was massive, its walls lined with glowing conduits and thrumming energy cores. In the center stood the reactor itself, a towering column of pulsating light. Kyra moved to the control console, her fingers manipulating the keys with a nervous familiarity.
I need 2 minutes to bypass the security protocols.
Marcus took up a defensive position. "You've got 1. The pirates arrived before she finished. The doors burst open and a squad of heavily armed enemies poured in. They hardly bothered to aim their weapons before opening fire. Marcus returned fire, the sharp cracks of his rifle echoing in the chamber. He ducked behind a console as energy blasts scorched the air around him.
I'm almost there!
Kyra shouted, her voice strained.
Can you think of a different phrase to use? This one's getting old.
Marcus replied, taking out another pirate. The firefight intensified. Marcus's rifle clicked empty, and he switched to his sidearm, taking down a pirate who had gotten too close.
Done! And I will as soon as you stop shortening my time estimates!
Kyra yelled. She activated the EMP device, and a low hum filled the chamber.
Not a chance. Let's go!
Marcus shouted, grabbing her arm. They ran as the EMP device began to charge. The reactor chamber shook violently, and the lights flickered as the device began to draw overwhelming amounts of power from the ship's grid, all of its safety mechanisms already disabled by Kyra's installation of the device. The corridors were chaotic. Pirates shouted and scrambled as alarms blared, their weapons and equipment failing one by one as even the corridors became magnetically charged. Marcus and Kyra reached the maintenance bay just as the EMP detonated. The shockwave rippled through the ship, sending it to a death spiral. The dropship's engines roared as Kyra's piloted it out of the hangar. Behind them, the dreadnought erupted into flames, debris scattering across the void. One hail came from the dreadnought, but Kyra didn't accept it. Whatever Zarak's final words were, she didn't want to hear them. Back on the ground, the colonists cheered as the pirate fleet disbanded, their reinforcements retreating into hyperspace. Marcus and Kyra emerged from the dropship to a hero's welcome. Tessa ran to meet them, her face alight with relief.
You did it!
She said, throwing her arms around Marcus. Barely, Marcus replied, his exhaustion evident. Kyra smiled faintly. What's next? Marcus looked out at the horizon, the first light of a new day breaking through the clouds. We rebuild. Weeks later, the colony was thriving again. The defenses were stronger, the people more united. Marcus stood atop the watchtower, his gaze fixed on the stars. Kyra joined him, her glyphs glowing softly. You're thinking about what's out there, aren't you? Always, Marcus admitted, then questioned. Why was Zarak so obsessed with our colony? What could have driven him to try and destroy us when we hadn't even done anything? Kyra's expression darkened slightly. Zarak was betrayed by a human once. He became hateful of your species and ever since, and distrusting of everyone besides himself. And me. Marcus put up a hand. Hey, if you really want to talk about whatever it was he did to you, sure, I'll listen. But if you don't... Kyra smiled. Thankfully, she did not have to verbally relive those memories. Before shouldering up next to him. Thank you. Maybe one day. He'd be looking for some way to get vengeance, and one day he heard about a new human colony on the fringes. So, he spent 2 years building a fleet. Most of what we destroyed was intended to be used against whatever response the Human Federation sent. I imagine he wasn't expecting to lose everything to a small colony. Marcus nodded. Damn right he wasn't.